Presupposition failure is an important area of understanding in relation to the overall knowledge of presuppositions and their meanings. It's a specific problem which emerges from truth relations knowledge about presuppositions, how we model our presuppositions in form of truth relations. We all know when we name something or we use a definite description in order to refer to somebody or something in semantics, that presupposes that that particular entity exists in the world. But in those situations in which those entities do not exist, there emerges a problem, and we call it presupposition failure sometimes, or value gap. In the following examples, you can see that A presupposes B, and then we'll see what happens if B is not true. The first example in front of you is that Ronald is a vegetarian. So from this example, we can presuppose that Ronald exists, or there is a Ronald in the world. The second example in front of you is the king of France is bald. So for that we can presuppose that there is a king of France. But if you just look at these examples again and just assume for the moment that if in both of these examples the second B statements or the presupposed statements are not true, what would happen to the overall veracity or truthfulness of the first statements? Let's see that if we assume that Ronald does not exist, so what would happen to the statement Ronald is a vegetarian? And what would happen if there is no king in France or of France? So what would happen to the statement the king of France is bald? So problem arises when there is no referent for the nominal, right? If the B sentences above are false, what is the status of these sentences? That leads us to think further, and we might provide an explanation that these statements are in a gray area. They are neither false nor true, and they may be treated as falling in some gray area. And we can chalk a truth table for these gray areas also. We have a P statement and Q. Q is the presupposed one, as we have discussed previously. If P is true, then Q is also true. If P is false, Q can still be true. But if we look at the argument the other way around, for example, we see that argument is leading from Q to P. So we see that if Q is true, that means that Ronald is there, Ronald exists. Then P, he is vegetarian or not, both can happen, both can be true. So it could be true or false. But if there is no Ronald, then he is a vegetarian or not is in a doubtful state. That's what we call gray area. Semantists usually call this situation as a value gap or truth value gap, and this is still an area of debate in contemporary semantics. One of the famous solutions to this problem has been provided by Russell, and he says that we could bridge this value gap by developing some complex sentences or presenting presuppositions of such sentences in a complex form with the addition of if and only if. For example, if we say the king of France is bald is true if and only if at least one thing is the king, at most one thing is the king, and also whatever is the king is bald. If these conditions are met, only then the first statement, the king of France is bald, is true. From this, it follows that the sentence A is false if there is no king of France, and there is no gray area between truth and false. So we are not in a doubtful state. These conditions which are created by Russell, they actually attempt to bridge that gray area which may fall between truth and falsity of this kind of statements. However, the cost of such exercises would remain the discrepancy between the surface language and semantic representation. So this discrepancy would still remain there, and developing an absolute truth model for such statements is still a challenge.